The clock on the wall read 2:17 a.m. Each tick of the second hand sounded like a hammer blow against the hull of a sinking ship. From his throne-like leather chair on the 70th floor, Mr. Kwan watched the city of Seoul glitter below, a sprawling galaxy of indifferent lights. His city, his empire, and it was all turning to dust. The Kwan shipping conglomerate, a behemoth of logistics and international trade, was bleeding out. On paper, it was a series of catastrophic misfortunes: a container ship lost in a sudden typhoon, a crucial port negotiation sabotaged, a data breach that had leaked their most sensitive routes to their rivals. But Kwan knew better. Misfortune was a stray dog. This was a wolf pack, coordinated and deliberate. He was being dismantled from the inside, and the final report from his auditors, due to be emailed any second, would be the official death certificate. He leaned his head back, closed his eyes, and slowed his breathing until it was a shallow, rhythmic whisper. He wasn't asleep. He was hunting. This was his oldest test, a ritual of paranoia perfected over 2 decades of navigating a world where smiles were daggers and handshakes were chains. He would feign exhaustion, a moment of weakness, and observe. Who would tiptoe around him with respect? Who would rifle through the papers on his desk? Who would see the dying lion and begin to circle? The silence in the vast office was his accomplice, amplifying every subtle sound. He had built this empire on the foundation his father had laid, a legacy of steel and shadow. His father had ruled with an iron fist, but also with an unshakable code of honor. Kwan felt the sting of failure not just in his balance sheets, but in his very soul. He was losing the house his father built. The soft, rhythmic squeak of a cart's wheel broke the stillness, growing closer down the marble hallway. It was the night janitor. A new girl, he recalled vaguely. Young. American. He'd only seen her from a distance, a fleeting shape in a dark blue uniform. A nobody. He remained perfectly still, a predator in repose, waiting to see what this small, insignificant creature would do in the presence of a weakened king. He listened as the office door opened with a barely audible click. The squeaking of the cart stopped. There was a pause, the sound of held breath. He imagined her taking in the scene, the sprawling mahogany desk, the floor-to-ceiling windows. The man who controlled it all slumped in his chair, seemingly defeated. Kwan's senses were on fire. He could discern the faint scent of lemon-scented cleaner and the subtle rustle of her uniform. Her footsteps were light, hesitant, not the confident stride of an opportunist or the clumsy shuffle of a fool. They carried a weight of quiet diligence. He had run this test on executives, on family members, on trusted lieutenants. He'd seen men he'd known for years inch closer to his desk, their eyes lingering on a sensitive file. He'd caught his own cousin attempting to photograph a private ledger with his phone. Each time, his cynicism was rewarded, his paranoia justified. Min-jun, his second-in-command, the man who was like a brother to him, had been in the office an hour earlier. Hyung, Min-jun had said, his voice a smooth balm of reassurance. We will weather this. I am tracking the source of the leaks. I have my best people on it. Just rest. Min-jun's footsteps had been firm, his presence confident. But now, in the silence, Kwan felt a cold dread coil in his gut. The reassurances felt hollow, a well-rehearsed play. This girl's quiet, unobtrusive presence felt more real. She moved through the office with a deliberate grace, her actions economical and soundless. The soft swish of a cloth wiping down a glass tabletop. The gentle click of a wastebasket lid. She worked around him as if he were a monument, an object deserving of a wide, respectful berth. She was not a threat. She was not a scavenger. She was simply doing her job. This, in itself, was an anomaly. In Kwan's world, no one was ever just doing their job. Everyone had an angle. The absence of one was the most suspicious angle of all. She finished her tasks near his desk, the scent of polish now fainter as she moved toward the far side of the room. He heard her collect the trash from a small bin near the window. He was about to write her off, another ghost in the machine of his life, when the sounds of her work stopped. The silence stretched, taut and expectant. Kwan's muscles tensed. This was the moment, the hesitation before the transgression. He waited for the soft rustle of paper, the quiet click of a phone camera. He braced himself for the familiar, bitter taste of another minor betrayal. Instead, he heard a different sound. A soft, almost inaudible sigh. It was not a sigh of frustration or boredom, but of sympathy. He strained his ears. He heard her take a step closer to the window. Then, another long silence. What was she looking at? Curiosity burned through his feigned slumber. He fought the urge to open his eyes, to break the spell. The discipline of a lifetime held him in place. Then he heard the gentle, unmistakable sound of a plastic bottle being unscrewed. A soft trickling followed, like a tiny, secret spring. It lasted only a few seconds before the cap was screwed back on. A moment later, the quiet squeak of her cart resumed, and the office door clicked shut behind her. She was gone. For a full minute, Quan did not move. He replayed the sequence of sounds in his mind, trying to decipher their meaning. The sigh. The pause. The water. It made no sense. Finally, he allowed his eyes to flutter open. The office was pristine, the ambient light of the city casting long shadows across the polished floor. Nothing was out of place. He pushed himself out of his chair, his joints stiff, and walked towards the window. There, on a small pedestal, sat his father's bonsai tree. It was a juniper, nearly a century old, its gnarled branches a miniature testament to endurance. Or they had been. Lately, in his distraction, he had neglected it. Its needles were turning a pale, sickly yellow. He looked closer. The soil at its base, which had been bone dry for days, was now dark and damp. She had watered his father's tree. With her own water. A nobody. A ghost in a blue uniform. She had seen a small, dying thing in the opulent tomb of his office, and she had offered it a piece of her own life. The gesture was so small, so profoundly simple, it struck him with the force of a physical blow. He touched one of the branches. It felt less brittle than before. In that moment, the mountain of his problems, the betrayals, the financial ruin, the crushing weight of his legacy, seemed to shift, to reorient around this single, inexplicable act of kindness. The spell was broken. The bonsai tree, a living link to his father's honor, had been tended by a stranger. It felt like a sign, a crack of light in his self-imposed darkness. He returned to his desk not with the weary resignation of a defeated man, but with a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Clarity. He looked at the labyrinth of figures and reports on his screen, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about small things, overlooked details. The kind of detail a person who waters a dying plant might notice. A soft knock at the door startled him. He growled. Enter. The door opened a few inches. It was the janitor, the young woman. Anaya. He remembered her name from the new staff roster. She stood in the doorway, clutching a small, crumpled piece of paper in her gloved hand. She looked terrified, as if she expected to be vaporized for daring to disturb him. Sir, she began, her voice low and steady, a surprising counterpoint to her nervous posture. I am so sorry to bother you. I was emptying the bin down the hall from Mr. Minjun's office, and this fell out. It's probably nothing, but it looked different. Not like the other trash. She held it out to him. Quan's first instinct was to dismiss her, to wave her away. What could a janitor possibly know? But the image of the watered bonsai flashed in his mind. He beckoned her forward. She approached the desk cautiously and placed the crumpled paper on the polished wood. He smoothed it out. It was a receipt from a high-security courier service, one known for its discretion and untraceability. It detailed the delivery of a small package, a data drive, the description specified, to a corporate suite in Tokyo. The name of the recipient was unfamiliar, a shell corporation, but the address was seared into Quan's memory. It belonged to the headquarters of the Inagawakai, the Yakuza syndicate that had been nipping at his heels for a decade. He felt the air leave his lungs. He looked at the date and time printed on the receipt. It was from 2 weeks ago, less than 12 hours before his flagship vessel, the Dragon's Pearl, had its navigation system mysteriously fail, causing it to run aground and spill its entire cargo. That single incident had cost him a fortune and, more importantly, his reputation for reliability. He stared at the receipt, this flimsy piece of trash, this ghost of a transaction. It was the thread, the one loose thread he'd been searching for. Stay here, he commanded, his voice a low growl. Anaya flinched but nodded, retreating to the wall by the door, her hands clasped in front of her. Quan's mind was racing. The receipt was damning, but it wasn't direct proof. It came from Minjun's trash, but anyone could have dropped it. He needed to see it. He picked up his secure phone, bypassing his normal chain of command. He dialed Lee, the grizzled head of his personal security detail, a man whose loyalty was to the Kwan family, not to the company. Lee, he said, his voice cold and clipped. I need the surveillance footage from the executive wing, Corridor 7, outside Minjun's office. 2 weeks ago, the 15th. I want every second from noon until midnight. Scrub it for any interaction with non-staff. Send it to my tablet. Now, there was no question, no hesitation. Just a calm, yes, Chairman, the line went dead. The wait was agonizing. The silence in the office was thick with unspoken tension. Kwan leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the city lights, but he wasn't seeing them. He was seeing 25 years of friendship. He and Minjun had come up together, two hungry kids from the same neighborhood. Kwan had the name and the legacy. Minjun had the street smarts and the silver tongue. They were supposed to be brothers. They had built this empire together. He had trusted him with everything. The thought of Minjun's betrayal was a physical pain, a blade twisting deeper than any financial loss ever could. He glanced over at Anaya. She was standing perfectly still, her eyes focused on the floor. She was trying to make herself invisible. He wondered what she was thinking, what she made of this strange, late-night drama. She, who had shown more concern for a dying plant than his own brother had for his entire life's work. He felt a strange, protective impulse. She had unknowingly walked into the heart of a war, armed with nothing but a dust cloth and a conscience. The tablet on his desk chimed, a sharp, digital sound that cut through the tension like a razor. The file had arrived. He took a deep breath, the air tasting of ozone and dread. He tapped the screen and began to watch. The footage was time-stamped, a grainy but clear view of the hallway outside Minjun's office. For a long time, there was nothing but the occasional executive striding past. Kwan fast-forwarded, his fingers skimming across the timeline. Then he saw it. 4:32 p.m. Minjun stepped out of his office, looking left and right down the empty corridor. He was visibly tense. A moment later, a man in a nondescript suit approached from the far end of the hall. Kwan's blood ran cold. He recognized the man's face from intelligence briefings. His name was Tanaka, a high-level enforcer for the Inagawakai. Kwan watched, his knuckles white as he gripped the tablet. The two men didn't shake hands. The exchange was brief, clinical. Minjun slipped a small, metallic object from his pocket, a slim data drive, and passed it to Tanaka. Tanaka pocketed it, gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod, and walked away. Minjun watched him go before ducking back into his office, as if nothing had happened. The entire transaction took less than 10 seconds. 10 seconds to sell out a lifetime of loyalty. 10 seconds to destroy an empire. Kwan stared at the frozen image of Minjun's face, a mask of strained composure, and felt a profound, bottomless emptiness. It wasn't just business. It was a desecration of memory, of brotherhood, of every shared struggle and victory. The accidents, the sabotaged deals, the leaked data, it all cascaded into place, a perfectly executed assassination of his company, orchestrated by the one man he would have trusted with his life. He slowly lifted his head from the screen. His gaze fell on Anaya, who was watching him with wide, worried eyes. She had no idea what she had done, what she had uncovered. This quiet girl, with her simple act of diligence, had handed him the weapon he needed to save himself. She had seen value in a piece of discarded trash, just as she had seen value in a neglected plant. She saw the details everyone else was too busy, too important, too ambitious to notice. She had shown more loyalty in a single night to a man she didn't even know than his own brother had shown in 25 years. The rage was still there, a white-hot core in his chest, but it was now tempered with an ice-cold resolve. The hunt was over. He pressed the intercom on his desk. Send Minjun to my office. Immediately, his voice was unnervingly calm. Minjun arrived within minutes, his tailored suit immaculate even at this ungodly hour. He walked in with a practiced air of concern, his brow furrowed. Hyung, he said, using the familial Korean term for older brother. You're still here? I was just about to call you. My team thinks they've found a lead. A possible breach originating from our Singapore office. He stopped when he saw Naya standing by the door, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features before he masked it. He saw her as an irrelevance, a piece of furniture. Quan said nothing. He simply sat in his chair, the silence his weapon of choice, and stared at the man who had been his shadow, his confidant, his brother. Minjun's confident facade began to crack under the weight of that silent, knowing gaze. Is everything all right, Hyung? He stammered. Quan didn't answer. He slowly, deliberately, turned the tablet on his desk around to face Minjun. He pressed play. The grainy footage of the hallway filled the screen. The silent meeting. The data drive. The face of the Yakuza enforcer. Minjun watched, and the color drained from his face, leaving behind a sickly, gray pallor. His carefully constructed world crumbled in 10 seconds of silent video. He looked up, his eyes wide with panic and disbelief, a cornered animal searching for an escape that wasn't there. It's not what it looks like, he whispered, the words catching in his throat. Hyung, you have to believe me. They were threatening me. My family. I had gambling debts. The excuses tumbled out, pathetic and hollow, dissolving in the oppressive silence of the room. Quan finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of a death sentence. You are my brother. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, a eulogy for something that was now dead. He pressed the intercom again.
Lee.
Come in. 2 of his security guards entered, large men who moved with quiet efficiency. They flanked Minjun, who seemed to shrink between them. Take him downstairs, Quan ordered, his voice devoid of all emotion. Make sure he tells you everything. The names, the accounts, the routes he compromised. Everything. Minjun looked at him one last time, his eyes pleading. But the man he knew was gone. In his place was a king, cold and absolute, reclaiming his throne. As they led him away, Quan's empire was still in ruins, but the rot at its core had been cut out. The office was quiet again, the ghost of the confrontation still hanging in the air. The immediate threat was gone, but the damage was done. The company was hemorrhaging money, and his investors were in full retreat. The most critical among them, a powerful Hong Kong tycoon named Mr. Chen, was scheduled to pull his entire line of credit at 9 a.m. It would be the final, fatal blow. Quan felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. He had won the battle, but the war was still lost. He looked over at Anaya, who hadn't moved an inch, her face a mixture of fear and awe. She was the beginning and the end of this night's story. Why did you do it? He asked, his voice softer now, weary. Anaya looked confused. Do what, sir? The plant, he clarified. And the receipt. You could have ignored both.
Why didn't you?
She looked down at her hands, seeming to gather her thoughts. When she looked up, her gaze was direct, her voice clear and without artifice. My grandmother raised me, she said. She worked as a cleaner her whole life. She always told me, it doesn't matter what your job is. You leave a place better than you found it, that's all. She gestured vaguely around the opulent office. The plant looked thirsty. The paper looked important. I'm just doing my job. Sir, leave a place better than you found it. The simple, profound wisdom of it cut through Quan's complex world of strategy and deception. For years, he had focused on conquering, on acquiring, on dominating. He had forgotten the simple principle of nurturing what he already possessed. Minjun had tried to burn the place down for his own gain. This young woman, with no stake in his empire, had tried to make it better, one small act at a time. An idea began to form in his mind, a desperate, audacious gamble. It was a long shot, a play that relied not on power or intimidation, but on the very thing he had spent his life viewing as a weakness, simple, unadorned integrity. He looked at Anaya, truly seeing her for the first time. She wasn't just a janitor. She was the foundation. He had been trying to save the crumbling penthouse of his company while the bedrock was being ignored. You're not done for the night, he said, his voice now firm with a newfound purpose. I have a meeting at 6 a.m., and you're coming with me. Mr. Chen's private meeting room was a study in minimalist power, stark white walls, a single black granite table, and a window overlooking the waking city. Chen himself was a man carved from the same granite, his face impassive, his eyes like chips of obsidian. He was old school, a man for whom honor and reputation were the only currencies that mattered. He had already written Quan off. "You have 10 minutes, Quan," Chen said, his voice flat. "Then my bankers have their instructions." Quan didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table, a position of command he no longer felt he deserved. Anaya stood nervously a few feet behind him, clutching her purse, looking entirely out of place in her simple dress amidst the stark wealth of the room. "Mr. Chen," Quan began, his voice steady, "I will not waste your time with excuses. My company was compromised. I was betrayed by my most trusted advisor, a man I considered my brother. He sold our secrets to our rivals." He slid a tablet across the table. It contained the confession Minjun had given, detailing the full extent of the sabotage. Chen glanced at it, his expression unchanging. "This explains your incompetence," he stated coldly. "It does not erase it. You allowed a viper into your house. You are right," Quan conceded, the admission costing him dearly. "My judgment failed. I trusted the wrong man. I was so focused on the view from the top floor that I forgot to check the foundations." He paused, then gestured back towards Anaya. "But my company's foundation is not rotten. It was simply overlooked." He then told Mr. Chen the story of the night. He spoke of his cynical test of feigning sleep to catch a thief. He described the quiet, diligent work of the janitor. He told him about the bonsai tree, his father's tree, and the small bottle of water. He held up the crumpled courier receipt. "This is what brought down the traitor," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "Not a team of expensive analysts. Not a high-tech security system. This. A piece of trash, saved by a woman who believes in leaving a place better than she found it." He looked directly at Chen. "My leadership was corrupted. But the spirit of my company is not. It is in her. It is in the people who do the right thing when no one is watching, not for reward but because it is the right thing to do. This is the spirit I will rebuild on. I am asking you not to invest in the company I had yesterday, but in the one I will build tomorrow, with people like her as my cornerstone." Chen was silent for a long, agonizing minute. He looked from Quan's intense face to Anaya's terrified but resolute one. He saw not a janitor but a symbol. "Loyalty like that cannot be bought," Mr. Chen said finally, a flicker of respect in his dark eyes. He tapped his phone. "Cancel the morning instructions," he ordered. "Mr. Quan has my full support. Do not waste it." 6 months later, the clock on the wall read 2:17 a.m. Mr. Quan was in his office, but he was not feigning sleep. He was working, the glow of his monitor illuminating a face that was leaner, sharper, but no longer haunted. The chaos had receded. With Chen's backing and the evidence from Minjun's confession, Quan had systematically dismantled the Yakuza's corporate sabotage, turning their own tactics against them. He had purged the disloyal and rebuilt his inner circle, not with the most cunning or the most ambitious, but with the most steadfast. Quan's shipping was leaner, stronger, and more resilient than ever before. A soft knock came at the door. "Enter," he said, a smile touching his lips. Anaya walked in. She no longer wore the dark blue janitor's uniform. Tonight, she wore a charcoal gray business suit, tailored perfectly. Her hair was styled elegantly, and she carried a tablet under her arm. She was no longer just Anaya, the janitor. She was Ms. Evans, the inaugural head of Quan Shipping's new department of operational integrity. Her role was unconventional. She had no profit targets, no sales quotas. Her sole mandate was to move through the company from the boiler rooms to the boardrooms and to see the things everyone else overlooked. She was the corporate conscience, the guardian of its soul. "The reports from the Busan terminal are in," she said, her voice retaining its quiet steadiness, now layered with a new confidence. "The overtime discrepancies were exactly where you suspected," he nodded, taking the tablet.
Good.
"Handle it." He stood up and walked over to a small tea station he'd had installed. He poured 2 cups of steaming barley tea. "You've been working too late," he said, handing her a cup. "Even a conscience needs to rest." She accepted the cup, a small smile on her face. "My grandmother always said an honest day's work doesn't end when the clock says so." They stood together by the window, looking out at the city. On the pedestal nearby, the ancient bonsai tree was thriving, its needles a deep, vibrant green, its branches reaching eagerly toward the light. It was a silent, living monument to the night that had changed everything. Quan looked from the tree to the young woman beside him. In his old life, he would have seen her as invisible a tool. Now, he saw her as his most valuable partner. She had taught him that true power wasn't about the ability to command fear, but the capacity to inspire loyalty, that the strongest foundations are not built with steel and concrete, but with quiet, everyday acts of integrity. He had set a trap for a thief and had instead found a savior, not in a boardroom, but in the quiet dignity of a girl with a dust cloth who believed in leaving a place better than she had found it.